Hey, what's up, sports fans? Welcome to Common Sense Sports Talk. My name is Andrew Freeman, and in today's episode, I'm going to be continuing my 2019 NFL preview series, taking a look at the AFC South. So, before I get into it here and really start breaking down each of these teams, I'd just like to say that if you're a fan of the channel and if you like the content that I'm producing, please leave a like and subscribe below. It really goes a long way in terms of building up this channel into what I want it to be, and I just really appreciate it. And of course, even though I pride myself on being as objective as possible in all my videos, obviously my channel is based off around sports opinion and sports debate. So if you have thoughts that you'd like to discuss and you have an opinion you'd like to discuss on any topic that I cover in any of my videos or in sports in general, please, I really encourage you guys posting your thoughts in the comment section below. I would love to discuss with you guys and debate with you guys about sports and about what I'm covering in all of these videos. So without a further ado, let's get into it here, starting with the Tennessee Titans. And last year was an interesting season for the Titans as a whole. You look at the fact that they were a playoff team in 2017. They had, some momentum winning a playoff game against the Kansas City Chiefs, and they decided to go in a different direction in the coaching staff, firing Mike Mularkey and bringing in Mike Vrabel to kind of bring some more energy and more aggressiveness to both sides of the ball on offense and the defense for this team. And the results were kind of mixed to a little bit inconsistent, I felt like. This is one of the most inconsistent teams in all of football last year. One week they'll go out there against a team like the Patriots and absolutely dominate them on both sides of the ball. The next week they'll go out there and they'll just completely lay an egg in a big game, such as the divisional game against Indianapolis. Both of those games, they did not play well in either contest against the Colts last year, and that really killed them because in Week 17 they had a chance, if they won the game, to make the playoffs as a wild card team, and they just did not get the job done. So that kind of defined their season last year. Bunch of highs, a bunch of lows, and ultimately it just did not work out for them in the end. So there were a lot of holes in this roster that they needed to address going into the offseason, and they were pretty aggressive, I thought, in terms of addressing those needs. Starting with the offense here in the free agency period, they went out there and they signed Roger Saffold, offensive guard, from the Los Angeles Rams on a 4-year, $44 million contract. And while Saffold is a very good player, you can make an argument that he was possibly the best lineman for the Rams last season. He's getting up there in age a little bit, and he really only has a few years of high-level production as an interior offensive lineman. So I thought this is a bit of an overpay. Long-term, it might not work out for this team, I feel like, with this contract. But in terms of the short-term impact, I think he's definitely an upgrade over what they had last year. The interior offensive line was definitely the weakest part of their offense outside of the quarterback position, which I'll get to later. They were not able to figure out a running game until late in the season. They weren't able to do what they wanted to do in that zone blocking scheme. So bringing in Saffold here, who's familiar with the system that they want to run, I thought that was a decent signing for them, even though they had to overpay for him just a little bit. They also brought in Adam Humphries, wide receiver from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, on a 4-year, $36 million contract. You can see that as a little bit of an overpay as well, just based off of Adam Humphries' production in the NFL so far. But I will say that Humphries, as a player, he really did not have a chance to shine in Tampa Bay just because he was so low in the pecking order for who was going to get so many targets. He was the number 4 wide receiver for this team. And then you look at their tight end situation with O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate. There were not a lot of targets to go around in that offense for Adam Humphries. So look at it here. He didn't really get the opportunities that his talent maybe deserves. And now he has a chance to really be the main slot receiver for the Tennessee Titans in the upcoming season. I kind of compare it to, obviously not on the same level, but to what the Patriots did with Wes Welker back in 2007, where Wes Welker just did not have the opportunities with the Miami Dolphins for a couple of years there. And then once he got the opportunity with the Patriots in a system that really fit his skill set, he was able to break out. Obviously, I don't see Adam Humphries, putting up anywhere near Wes Welker numbers. He's not the same caliber player. He's not in the same caliber offense. He doesn't have the same caliber quarterback throwing him the ball. But Humphries could make a big impact, I think, this next upcoming season as a slot guy as a possession wide receiver for this team because he really is a solid weapon, I think, in the passing game. You then look at the big trade to bring in Ryan Tannehill to be their backup quarterback and possibly push starter Marcus Mariota at that starter spot. They only gave up a late round pick to bring Ryan Tannehill in. Obviously, things had kind of run its course in Miami, and Tannehill kind of proved that he's not a long-term answer as a franchise quarterback. But I think he's definitely still a solid backup to borderline low-level starter in the NFL, I think. And while, he's not going to be the starter, you'd hope, for over a 16-game season, Mariota proved last year, really throughout his entire career, that he just struggles to stay healthy over a 16-game season. So last year they had Blaine Gabbert at quarterback as their backup, and he's definitely not very good whatsoever. So Ryan Tannehill is definitely an upgrade over him, and maybe he pushes Marcus Mariota a little bit, who is entering the last year of his contract. They still have to find out whether he is the franchise quarterback long-term for this organization. And then they made some signings on defense as well. They bring in Cameron Wake on a 3-year, $23 million deal. Again, a little bit of an overpay based off of his age and based off the fact that his play over the past few seasons has kind of tailed off a little bit. He's still a pretty good player, a very good pass rusher still at this point in his career. Just maybe not the same dominant force that he was early on in his career with Miami there. So you got to like that sign in terms of the fact that they upgrade their pass rush a little bit. But again, it was a little bit of an overpay in order to do so. And they also brought in a guy in Brent Urban, defensive tackle, on a 1-year deal from the Baltimore Ravens. I like that signing. He's a good run stopper, good on the first and second down against the run and base packages. Isn't going to have much impact in terms of the pass rush, but very good run stopper. I like that signing there on a 1-year deal. In terms of key losses, there wasn't really anything major. Josh Klein and Quentin Spain were contributors in their interior offensive line last year. They left for the Vikings and Bills, respectively. I didn't think that was a major loss. I felt like they got better at those positions anyway. They also lost Jonathan Cyprin, who's kind of their third safety as a box guy last year. He left for the Eagles. Again, not a terrible loss. I mean, he was depth at best for this team. So going into the draft, I've got to say this was a very interesting draft for the Tennessee Titans. In the first round, they drafted Jeffrey Simmons, defensive tackle out of Mississippi State. And Simmons is an interesting pick because you can make the argument that he was a top 5 to top 10 talent in this draft. But because of a torn ACL during the offseason preparing for the NFL draft, and then some of the off-field issues that he had in the past earlier on in college and in high school, there were definitely some question marks with Simmons as a prospect as a whole. But the Tennessee Titans here, that he may not be able to contribute very much in year one, but long-term, I think they kind of see him as a long-term replacement to Jarrell Casey as the dominant interior force on their defensive line going into the future. So I think it made sense for them with this pick. You'd like to use that pick maybe more on an offensive player to help out Marcus Mariota, but Simmons is a unique talent as an interior pass rusher. So I think to take a risk like that, it certainly makes sense for a Tennessee team that with Mike Vrabel as their head coach kind of bringing in a culture change to be more aggressive overall on the field. They're being a little bit more aggressive in terms of the way they put together this roster, I feel like. So I thought that was a decent pick for them in terms of the value there at 19th overall. And then in the second round and third round, they addressed their offense a little bit. A.J. Brown, wide receiver out of Ole Miss in the second round. Nate Davis, offensive guard out of Charlotte. I think he fits their scheme really well. A.J. Brown was a solid value in the second round. He may not be a superstar player for this team, but I think he can contribute as a number 2 wide receiver down the road for this team. But my favorite pick for the Titans in this draft was in the fourth round with Amani Hooker, safety out of Iowa. Hooker is not an elite athlete by any means, but he's a very good tackler. He can play in the box for you. He's got very good coverage skills despite a lack of elite athleticism. He can play in the slot a little bit against tight ends and slot wide receivers. He can match up against a variety of different players. And he's got very good instincts. He's got very good ball skills. So I loved him as a prospect coming out of college, coming out of Iowa. I saw him more as a second round to early third round type of player. And the game in the fourth round was an absolute steal for this team. He's going to contribute right away as a third safety in dime and sub packages, stuff like that. and maybe even be a long-term starter for this team. And then in the 5th and 6th round, they got DeAndre Walker to help contribute on the pass rush, outside linebacker at Georgia. I'm not really expecting too much out of him at this point. David Long, linebacker of West Virginia, he's going to be a special teamer and add some depth in the linebacking core. I don't really see much there. So looking at this roster and breaking it down here, on offense, I kind of feel like this team is slightly above average on offense just because they have the capability to run the ball so well. When you look at their personnel and the way this team is kind of set up. But their ceiling is really based around Marcus Mariota and whether he can prove himself to be the franchise quarterback. Because after what was a pretty promising rookie year for Mariota, he's kind of proven to be average at best, I feel like, when healthy. And that's really the main question mark with Mariota is, can he stay healthy over a 16-game season? He really hasn't done it whatsoever throughout his NFL career so far. It seems like he's always dinged up here or there with minor injuries that force him to either play hurt or miss a few games throughout the course of a season. So I think bringing in Ryan Tannehill, you have good depth there. You have good competition there. They're saying repeatedly that he's going to be the backup, that Tannehill is not going to be pushing for a starting spot. But you have to feel like if you're Marcus Mariota that the pressure is on now to prove himself as the guy for this team long term. His contract is running up. He needs to really showcase that he is the guy that they can build around as a franchise quarterback. And the Titans are doing everything they can, I feel like, to make things easier for him and to also push him and bring some competition to where he's not feeling completely safe for his job for this upcoming season. So, like I said, they've done a lot the past few seasons to add some weapons around Mariota at the skill player position, and I think they're pretty solid overall. Obviously, Derrick Henry at running back, he's an absolute beast. You saw it last year once they started to actually give him the ball a little bit more, what he could do. He was an absolute monster down the stretch for this team last year. But behind them, there really isn't that much depth to be, of note, really. Deion Lewis, he's a nice third down back for them. Not the same player he was in New England by far, but still a solid player overall. Behind them, really nothing special to really look at there. At wide receiver, Corey Davis, he's not quite, what the Titans thought he would be coming out of college, out of Central Michigan, I think it was. They used a top 5 pick on him a few years ago, and he's not quite that level of a player, but I think he's kind of proved himself as a true number 1 wide receiver, I think, as a low-end number 1 wide receiver. He's a good player overall. Maybe he can have a breakout year if Marcus Mariota can stay healthy. But you look at the rest of this receiving core here, Taywan Taylor is pretty solid. Adam Humphries, I think, will have a big year in the slot. And then A.J. Brown, maybe he can contribute and be a number 2 option on the outside for this team. There is some talent in this wide receiving core. They just have to have some consistency at quarterback and develop a chemistry, I think, with this group as a whole. You then look at the tight end spot, Delaney Walker. He's coming back healthy. He's maybe not the same player he once was due to injury and age, but he's still very solid. He's a very good tight end, probably a top 10 to 15 tight end in the NFL right now. Very good player. He's going to be a safety blanket, I think, for this offense going forward. And then the offensive line. When you look at this offensive line here, I think it definitely did get better this offseason. It's a solid offensive line, not necessarily anything special, but there are some question marks here. Taylor Lewan, who's one of the best left tackles in all football, he's really the heart and soul of this team in Tennessee here. He's going to be suspended for the first 4 games of the season, so that's a huge loss for them to start off the year. This division is really tough. It's going to be a tight division throughout the season. So to lose a guy like Taylor Lewan so early in the year and not have him be able to contribute is going to be a huge loss for this team. But they redid their entire interior, it seems like. They brought in Saffold. They brought in Pamphile to be their starting guards next upcoming season, Kevin Pamphile. And they still have Ben Jones at center. And with Jack Conklin at right tackle, who's pretty solid at the right tackle spot, you like what they have in terms of the starting group here for this team. So, pretty solid group overall on the offensive line. And overall, I think this offense does have some potential to be a little bit better than they were last year if Marcus Mariota can stay healthy and really put it together. But right now, I think they're an average to slightly above average offense just because they will be able to run the ball this year, and that's what they're going to be trying to do, I think, more this season. So transitioning to the defense, I thought last year they played pretty well at times under new head coach Mike Vrabel. I have them rated as more of an above-average unit overall, but there is a potential there to be a top 10, maybe even top 5 unit if some key players step up for them this upcoming season. When you look at them up front, Jarrell Casey, I think he's one of the most underrated players in the entire NFL, certainly along the defensive line, one of the most underrated, not talked about defensive linemen in the entire NFL. This guy is an absolute beast up front. He's very, very good, and no one talks about him because he's in a small market like Tennessee. It's almost criminal that he doesn't get the recognition that I think he deserves. He's a very good player. He's starting to get a little bit up there in age. He's still in the prime of his career, obviously, but there is some concern that he may start to tail off a little bit in the next few years, which is why they brought in a guy like Jeffrey Simmons. You're hoping that he can get back healthy late in the season and contribute, but other than those two, they have guys like Brent Urban, who's going to be a good run stopper. Daquan Jones is pretty solid there. You like what they have up front, and they should be able to stop the run and generate some pass rush with their interior defensive line. You then look at the edge spot. Cameron Wake is a guy who could add some juice for them on the edge as a pass rusher. I'm not sure if he's quite the 3-down player that he once was in terms of stopping the run and being able to hold up over an entire game, playing all 3 downs, but as a situational pass rusher, I like him in this group. And then you have Harold Landry, who they drafted last season in the 2nd round. He was a guy I wasn't a huge fan of last year going into the draft. I thought he was more of a one-dimensional, one-trick pony type of pass rusher. But if he can take that next step, he's going to be a guy that could really help out this pass rush. And hopefully he takes that next step for this defense because they need to add a little bit more juice to be a consistent pass rush, to be able to affect opposing offenses a little bit more. You then look at the linebacking core, and I do like the talent here. Rashad Evans did have some struggles a little bit last year as rookie linebacker. He got banged up last year, dealt with some injuries, so you're hoping that he can take the next step. But other than that, you have Wesley Woodyard still there. He's still a very good player. The depth here is pretty good as well. Jayon Brown had a big role for them last season when Rashad Evans was dealing with injuries. So he's pretty good as depth there. Overall, their linebacking core is very solid, and they can do a lot of different things in terms of the versatility of this unit here. So I like their linebackers. They're pretty solid overall. Then the secondary. This is a unit that does have a lot of upside overall. Starting at the cornerback spot, Malcolm Butler, you're hoping that he can be more consistent. Signing him to a big year contract last season. Malcolm Butler, he was a little bit up and down overall last season, so you're hoping that he can step up and be more consistent like he was in New England as a Patriot. But they also have some good depth with guys like Logan Ryan and Adoree Jackson. Adoree Jackson is a very good young slot corner, very good player at this stage in his career, very good returner as well. He had some juice to their special teams unit. But the strength of this team is their safeties. Kevin Byard is an absolute stud. He's one of the best safeties in all of football, I think. Very good coverage, very good ball skills. He tackles pretty well. Just about everything you want in a modern-day safety, he does it. Very underrated player. Kenny Vaccaro, then, is a good box safety, I think. Very good tackler, very good at attacking the short zones, very good at contributing in the run game. You like Vaccaro there. And then I already mentioned Hooker. I love that pick. He's very good depth, and he's going to contribute in terms of being on dime packages and stuff of that nature this upcoming season, and maybe fill in for Vaccaro as a long-term starter for this team. So when I look at the Tennessee Titans overall, looking for their next upcoming season in 2019, I think worst-case scenario, they're a 6-10 win team, but they can also be as good as a 10-6 team if Marcus Mariota can develop and this defense kind of takes that next step to being a good defense, a top 10, top 5 type of defense next season. But my final prediction for them is 8-8 going into this year. I think they're going to be competitive. They're going to be in the hunt for a playoff spot all season long. There just isn't enough high-end talent, I think, across this roster to be able to compete with some of the other teams in this division. So overall, 8-8 for the Tennessee Titans. But I do like this team's future going to the future if they can find that quarterback spot and figure that out. So moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars, who, man, last year was a tough year for Jacksonville. They went into the season with very high Super Bowl aspirations, and they got off to a really good start. They were 3-1. They exercised some demons against New England Patriots, pretty much blowing them out. They looked like they were primed to be AFC contenders once again. And then it seemed like after that Patriot game, they just fell off a cliff. This team took a nosedive in the middle of the season, and they never really recovered after that. Blake Bortles was awful. The defense regressed. They dealt with some injuries to key players. They were just – last year was a tough year for them. So they went into this offseason, and they were content with making some wholesale changes to this team. They were up against the cap a little bit, so they had to let go of some key contributors on that defense that was so good for them back in 2017. So this is definitely a revamped defense to a degree and a revamped offense, because when you look at what they did in free agency, the big move that they made was bringing in Nick Foles on a 4-year, $88 million contract. And, I'll touch on Nick Foles a little bit more when I break down this roster as a whole. But I just felt like this was a huge overpay. We've seen the value of having a rookie contract quarterback on your team. We know how tough it is now once you give a quarterback big-time money, how tough it is to build a balanced roster around that big contract. And I just felt like giving Nick Foles his contract now, I wasn't surprised that he was necessarily signed by the Jaguars. There was a connection with John DeFilippo, the offensive coordinator there. He was the quarterback's coach for Nick Foles a couple of years ago in Philadelphia. So it made sense that Nick Foles would go to Jacksonville. It didn't make sense that the Jacksonville Jaguars would give him that contract when there really wasn't any other team out there that was, bidding for his services. I thought the Jaguars really bid against themselves here, and they overpaid for Nick Foles, and they really did not have to. And that's tough because they're in a tough salary cap situation anyway. And you look at some of the guys that they had to get rid of, in order to make this work. Malik Jackson, they let him go to the Philadelphia Eagles defensive tackle. He was a big-time pass rusher in the interior. Tayshaun Gibson, he was basically their starting free safety. They're really their only playmaker at the safety spot. He leaves for the Houston Texans, the division rival. This one was out of their control, but Telvin Smith, he's taking a break from football this upcoming season to kind of focus on his mental health, to kind of focus on his personal life. It's a huge loss in the linebacking core because he's one of the best off-ball linebackers in all of football. That's a huge loss there. And then some of the offensive guys they lost. Dante Moncrief didn't really do much for them last year, but he was a solid wide receiver. TJ Yeldon as a third down, change of pace guy. Carlos Hyde, who they traded for from the Cleveland Browns last year, he's gone. They had to redo this entire roster, I think. And if Nick Foles works out, then great. But if he doesn't, then this team is stuck into mediocrity. So looking at their draft here, while I felt like they kind of did not hit their free agency out of the park as well as they could have, their draft was definitely a good step in the right direction for this team. First of all, in the first round, getting Josh Allen at the 7th overall selection, that might be a steal that we're looking back on in a few years as a steal. Josh Allen was a top 5 talent in this draft, and for him to just fall to them like that, just outstanding work for the Jaguars there. And then the second round, the fact that they get Jawan Taylor, offensive tackle out of Florida, who might be the best tackle in this draft class. The fact that he falls to them in the second round, that's definitely a steal if he works out, because there were some injury concerns with Taylor, but he was arguably a top 10 to 15 talent in this draft. So you got to look very positively on that pick for them there. It's kind of reminds me of the draft a few years ago when they had Jalen Ramsey and Myles Jack in the first and second round, where they get a top 5 talent in Jalen Ramsey, and then they get a guy like Myles Jack, who was a top 10 talent in the second round due to injury concerns. Very reminiscent of that draft there. Look at the rest of this draft. If they can get a contributor out of the rest of this draft class, then we're going to be looking back at this group as a very good draft for the Jaguars going forward. Josh Oliver and Quincy Williams in the third round, tight end and linebacker respectively. Quincy Williams is going to be competing for a starting spot now that Telvin Smith is out, so hopefully he can work out there. And Josh Oliver, they need him to be, another added dynamic weapon in the passing game for this offense. And then later in the draft, Raquel Armstead, running back out of Temple. He's more of a third down back. Gardner Minshew, a developmental quarterback prospect out of Washington State. Dontavius Russell, more of a run-stopping defensive tackle out of Auburn. This is a good draft, I think, for the Jaguars, and I thought it made up in many ways for a lackluster free agency period. So looking ahead at the Jacksonville Jaguars roster and kind of breaking this roster down, I think this team overall is a thoroughly mediocre team at this point. Starting with the offense, let's not make any mistake here. Nick Foles, he is what he is. He's a great backup quarterback, but as a long-term franchise starting quarterback, he just isn't that player. He's a legend. He's a Philadelphia legend. You can never take away that Super Bowl run he had in 2017. But I don't think Nick Foles will have the dramatic impact on this team that a lot of people think he will. He'll be better than Blake Bortles, but outside of that, he isn't going to elevate this offense and this team to anything past what this team is already. And when I look at the skill position players on this roster, it isn't the same situation that Foles found himself in Philadelphia, where he had wide receivers all over the place. He had Zach Ertz, one of the best tight ends in all of football, one of the best offensive lines in all of football. They were able to run the ball pretty effectively in 2017, not so much last year, but they had weapons all over the place for Foles to throw the ball to. And they had a defense that could make up for his mistakes in terms of forcing a few throws here and there. So when I look at the skill position players for the Jaguars, I think their receivers, starting with them, are pretty average. Marquise Lee, I like him as a player. He could have a good year coming off of an injury that he suffered last season early in the year. He really didn't contribute at all due to a knee injury, so you're hoping getting him back healthy will be a boost for this offense. They signed Chris Conley from the Kansas City Chiefs, so hopefully he can contribute. And the big thing is for guys like DJ Chark to step up in his second season. He's been more impressive in camp this year, but he really didn't show much last year. He's a freak athlete, but as a football player and as a receiver, he has a lot to work on. So your hope that he can develop there. At the tight end position, there really isn't much to say. You hope that Josh Oliver can step up as a rookie, but I'm not really counting on him. Other than that, Jeff Swain, James O'Shaughnessy, Ben Koyak, there really isn't a lot of talent at the tight end spot. This team is definitely going to be a run-first team. They're going to try and pound the ball with Leonard Fournette, who you hope can have a big year. He had a good rookie season, but last year he was injured. He wasn't as effective. And that kind of starts up front as well with the offensive line. When they're healthy, this can be a very good offensive line. I think they're pretty solid overall. Cam Robinson, he dealt with some injuries last year. He's getting back healthy now. And the interior is particularly solid when you look at Andrew Norwell, Brandon Linder, and A.J. Cann, especially with Linder and Norwell. Those two guys are very good at left guard and center for this team. Linder's been one of the most underrated centers in all football, I think, for a very long time. Norwell, who they signed to a big contract last year, he's an absolute road grader in the running game. So you like what they have there. And then obviously with Jawaan Taylor, if he can really step up the season and be a nice force at right tackle as a rookie, you like this offensive line. But at the end of the day, I don't see Foles elevating this skill position group past what it is. This is not a particularly talented offense. I think they are average at best at this point. So moving on to the defense. This is a very good defense still, probably still a top 10 unit overall in the NFL. But they are not the same as they were 2 years ago when they were the best defense in all of football. The defensive line is still pretty stacked. Calais Campbell is a beast up front. He's maybe not what he was in terms of being a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, but he's still going to be playing at a Pro Bowl level, I think, this season. A very good player along the defensive line. And then you combine him with Marcel Darius, Taven Bryan, who they hope that they can develop him a little bit in his second season. Avery Jones will have a nice role as a run stopper on early downs. There's a lot to like about this defensive line. They're very good up front, I think. And then on the edge, you have Yannick Ngakoue and Josh Allen. That provides you a very potent edge rush. With Ngakoue, he's dealing with a contract situation. He's going into the last year of his rookie deal. So he was holding out for a bit, but he's back now. You're hoping in a contract year that he has his best year ever. He's really more of a one-dimensional pass rusher, but he's a very good pass rusher nonetheless. So you like what you have there. And Josh Allen, he will contribute as a rookie as well. This pass rush should be very, very good this season. But when you get to the back end of the defense at linebacker, Telvin Smith is a huge loss for this team. Again, he's one of the best linebackers in terms of pass coverage and going sideline to sideline with his speed. That's a big-time loss. I mean, you have Miles Jack there, still a stud. Very good in the middle of his defense, very fast, can cover a lot of ground in the short area zones there. But you're relying on guys like Quincy Williams and Leon Jacobs to have big roles in the linebacking core for this team. And I just don't see it. Leon Jacobs is a backup at best. And Quincy Williams was a guy that wasn't even on my radar in terms of the third round. He was a guy that I thought was way overdrafted. He's fast. He's undersized. So maybe he can step up and impress me a bit and prove me wrong, but I don't see it at this point. And then when you look at the secondary, I think while the safeties are a concern, they need Ronnie Harrison to step up. He kind of took over at the safety spot there in the middle of the season last year, going into his second year. You hope he can be a guy that can build around the back end of the defense. Other than that, Gerard Wilson isn't all that good. Cody Davis, CJ Rivas, Andrew Wingard, an undrafted free agent. Really not much to talk about in terms of the safety group. That's probably the weakest part of this defense by far. But they might have – in fact, I do think they have the best pair of corners in the entire NFL with Jalen Ramsey, who is the best cornerback in the NFL, and A.J. Boye, who maybe didn't have as good of a year last year as he did in 2017, but he's still a very, very good lockdown corner. And the depth is, not the best at the cornerback's position for them. DJ Hayden is okay in the slot. But as long as Jalen Ramsey and A.J. Boye are healthy, this is a lockdown unit in terms of their cornerbacks there. So this is really the strength of their defense to be able to cover. They will rely on a good pass rush. They will have some lockdown on the edges there. So this defense is still going to be a very good unit this next upcoming season. They're just not going to be the dominant force they were a couple of seasons ago. And that's why I think when I hear analysts talk about them being a potential playoff team, I just don't see it. If they were the elite defense that they were a couple seasons ago, then yes, I think Nick Foles can do enough to help the team make a playoff run. But as it is right now, I just don't see it. Their defense is going to be good, but they're not an elite defense anymore. So they're definitely going to have to deal with that this upcoming season. So in terms of worst case scenario, I think there's a pretty small level of error there. I can see them winning as few as 5 wins, but maybe as many as 7 wins. I don't think this is a playoff team. I don't like their upside as a team overall. Like I said, they're thoroughly mediocre as a team. I have to go in 6-10, which, will be an improvement, but not a big jump I think they were expecting going all in on a guy like Nick Foles. So moving on to the Houston Texans. When we look at this team, they lost in the first round of the playoffs last year. Deshaun Watson continued to progress as a franchise quarterback, but they had a lot of holes entering this free agency period and a lot of decisions to make. So we look at some of the moves that they made. They lost Tyrann Mathieu early on in free agency. They were expecting to re-sign him at the safety spot. They replaced him with Tayshaun Gibson from the Jacksonville Jaguars on a 3-year, $22.5 million contract. They also lost Kareem Jackson at cornerback. Lost to the Broncos. That's a pretty big loss. He was a solid starting corner for them for a long time. So they bring in Bradley Roby, cornerback, on a 1-year deal from the Broncos. They're hoping that he had some struggles last season, but they're hoping that on a 1-year deal, a proven contract, that he can play up to his first-round status and play like he did earlier in his career when he was a pretty good player for the Broncos in that 2015 defense for them. But the biggest question mark for this team was their offensive line. And they brought in Matt Khalil at offensive tackle on a 1-year deal to be their starting left tackle. It's a 1-year deal. It's a stopgap option, but Khalil is not a good offensive tackle, not in the slightest. And then they needed to fix their running game because their running back situation is one of the least inspiring in the NFL. I like the trade that they made to bring in Duke Johnson at running back, trading a 4th-round pick. That could be a 3rd-round pick, depending on how many touches that Duke Johnson gets this upcoming season. So they made some moves to help out Deshaun Watson in this offense, but not enough in terms of the free agency period. They also had some key losses such as Kevin Johnson, cornerback to the Bills, Demaryius Thomas, who they traded a 4th-round pick for last year in the middle of the season. They lost him to the Patriots. Christian Covington was solid as a defensive tackle last year. They lose him to the Cowboys. So a lot of turnover in Houston. But nonetheless, this is still a very talented team. And when you look at what they did in the draft, I thought it was it's one of the few drafts that I wasn't a huge fan of, most notably because of their 1st-round pick. it was pretty clear that they were going to go offensive line with their first-round pick. And unfortunately, they just barely missed out on the guy that they wanted, and they had to settle for Titus Howard, offensive tackle out of Alabama State. Howard, I liked him as a prospect, more as a day two guy. I think he could stand to get stronger, to work on his technique a little bit. He's a bit raw as an edge protector on the offensive line. But Titus Howard does have a lot of potential. He's got very quick feet. He's very agile as an offensive lineman. Other than that, they did get some good value, I thought, in the second round. Monty Johnson, good cornerback for them out of Kentucky. He replaces a guy in Kareem Jackson, hopefully, and Kevin Johnson, who didn't work out as a first-round pick. So you're hoping that Lonnie Johnson can work out. He's a very physical player in the secondary for them. They got another offensive tackle, Max Sharping. Again, they're trying to boost that offensive line for Deshaun Watson. They've had probably one of the worst in the NFL over the past few seasons, if not the worst. They continue to add to this team, this offense in the third round. Cale Waring, tight end out of San Diego State. They added to the defensive line with Charles Omenihu out of Texas in the fifth round. Again, it really comes down to missing out on Andre Dillard. If they would have gotten Andre Dillard with that first pick as a guy who could be a franchise left tackle, I would have looked at this draft class much, much more positively, I think. So overall, looking at this roster, even though it wasn't the best draft overall and the best free agency period, this is still a playoff caliber team, and there's star power all over the place. But the main problem I find with this roster and why it isn't a Super Bowl contender necessarily is that I think they lack balance and depth at a variety of different positions across the roster on both offense and defense. So starting with the offense, Deshaun Watson, he's a guy that's proven himself as a top 10-ish quarterback. He's in that range, I feel like, at this point. He's a star player for this team. He's the engine that runs this franchise. He's definitely proven himself as a franchise quarterback that they can build around long term. Really like him as a player, and the problem comes with building around it because like I said, DeAndre Hopkins, he's the best, maybe the best wide receiver in all of football. I think Julio Jones is right in that conversation as well, but Hopkins is an absolute monster. But like I said, the lack of balance and depth on this team is really concerning, especially when you look at the wide receiver core here. It does leave a little bit to be desired besides Hopkins. They don't really have much at tight end, really nothing there. I mean, going down the list of tight ends here, Jordan Akins, Jordan Thomas, Darren Fells. I mean, there really isn't nothing of note at the tight end spot. And then at the other wide receivers, you look at Will Fuller, Kiki Kuti. These guys are pretty solid when healthy, but that's the problem with those guys. They get hurt all the time, especially Will Fuller, who's never has played a 16-game season at all. He's one of the best deep threats in all football, but, he can't get that done there. Then at the running back position, they're not spectacular, but I thought they did get better bringing in Duke Johnson, like I said before. It does lessen Lamar Miller's role, who they signed to a pretty good contract a few seasons ago, who hasn't panned out for them. He hasn't really been much of a difference maker at all. I would say watch out for a guy like Karan Higdon as an undrafted free agent. I really liked him coming out of this draft. He has a chance to make an impact as the third guy in this rotation there. So the skill position, I think they will be able to put up some points just because Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins are so good together. They have such a great chemistry at the quarterback and wide receiver position. Their connection is awesome. They will be able to put up some big games here and there. But what limits the ceiling of this offense and this team as a whole is the offensive line. It is still a huge issue. They've done a lot to try to address the position, but I don't think they've done enough. Titus Howard, hopefully he can work his way into a starting spot somewhere on this offensive line. He was drafted to be a tackle, but it looks like right now they're going to have him start off at left guard. It looks like he's competing for that position over there. So we'll see how he works out. He's definitely, I would think he would be better than a guy like Senio Clemente. Again, just not a lot of good names on this offensive line. Nick Martin's solid at center, and Zach Fulton's pretty good at right guard. So if Titus Howard is to be their starting left guard this season, I think their interior is pretty solid. Nothing special, but I think they can definitely they won't screw up anything in terms of their interior offensive line, but the tackles are very concerning. Like I said, Matt Khalil is one of the worst starting left tackles in all of football, just isn't good whatsoever. And then Centrell Henderson at the right tackle is just not good whatsoever. So this offensive line leaves a lot to be desired. My biggest fear is that Deshaun Watson, who is a little bit of a thinner built quarterback, I just fear that he will not be able to stay healthy for the season, and that could really impact their season and their franchise as a whole going forward to the future. Because if Deshaun Watson is not healthy long term, then this team is just screwed. Let's just say how it is. So when you look at the defense now, again, there's star power all over the place here. This is a very strong unit overall. This is a good defense. J.J. Watt, he's still one of the most dominant defensive players in the entire NFL up there. He really proved last year that he's still one of the elite players in the entire league. You love to see him get back on track after 2 years where he was basically out with injury. I mean, when this guy is healthy, he is, if not the best player in the NFL in terms of defensive players, he's right up there with the guys like Aaron Donald and Khalil Mack. So you love to see him healthy. He's awesome up there. But they also have a pretty good players alongside him as well. DJ Reader is a good run stopper on the defensive line. They'll need guys like Angelo Blackson and Carlos Watkins to step up. But other than that, the defensive line is pretty solid. They will be able to stop the run pretty effectively. But there's a big question mark on this defense, and that's the Jadeveon Clowney holdout. That could be a major impact on this defense overall, because when he's in the lineup, he's basically like a Swiss Army knife at linebacker for them. They line him up all over the place. He can rush from the edge. He can rush from the interior. He's a freak athletically. He stops the run. He's effective as a pass rusher. And the fact that he's holding out now, he won't sign his franchise tender. And it appears that the Texans are going to be looking to trade him in the upcoming weeks here before the season while he has some trade value left. It's kind of similar to the Khalil Mack situation last season, where you have a franchise pass rusher who got tagged, who's in the last year of his deal, looking to get extended, and the team just isn't willing to pay up a big contract for him. So they're going to try and look to get as much as they can for him. If he doesn't sign, we'll see how that situation plays out. With Jadeveon Clowney in the lineup, though, this pass rush is as good as any in the NFL. He's a very good player. Maybe not quite the player we thought he was as a number one overall pick in 2014, but still a very good defender. But besides Clowney, they still have a guy like Whitney Merciless there. He's not the same player he once was a few years ago, where he was getting double-digit sacks every single season. Injuries and age have kind of taken away his effectiveness, but you're hoping that he can bounce back here. He's looked pretty good in camp so far, all reports indicate. But again, there's a lack of depth on the edge here, so they really need Jadeveon Clowney back, I feel like, if they're going to be contending at all for a playoff position. And then you look at the back seven of this team. It's pretty solid overall. You start the linebackers there. Zach Cunningham's a very fast, very good inside linebacker. Ben Nardrick, McKinney, he's a Pro Bowler last year, very good. So you like the inside linebacker duo there. Very good in terms of covering and stopping the run with their linebackers. You like what they have. And then in the secondary, there are some question marks in terms of the depth, like I mentioned before. But Jonathan Joseph is still pretty solid as a cornerback, very physical as a cover corner at the line of scrimmage. You're hoping you can get a lot out of Bradley Roby. We'll see what happens there. Aaron Colvin's decent as a slot corner. And then in the secondary, Tayshaun Gibson, who they signed, he's a pretty good playmaker. He's definitely a step down from Tyrann Mathieu, but he's still a pretty solid player. And then Justin Reed's solid as well. He's a good starting strong safety for them. So overall, when I look at this defense, I think this is still a good defense if Jadeveon Clowney does play for them this upcoming season. But if he doesn't, then this defense definitely takes a step back. It might be a situation like earlier in the decade where it was really J.J. Watt, and that's about it on this defense. So you really hope that Jadeveon Clowney can make it back for this team and they can figure out that contract situation. So when I look at the Texans overall, I think, like I mentioned before, this team is going to be in the hunt for a playoff spot all year long. And they could potentially win the division, I think, if things go right. Their offensive line can get it together, if they can stay healthy, if Jadeveon Clowney's back. This team could make a run for a divisional crown once again and repeat as division champions. I see them winning as few as 8 wins, but as many as 11 wins this season. overall, my final prediction for them is 10-6. I think they're going to be in the hunt for a wild card spot this year in this division, but I'm pretty high on the Texans overall if they can figure out a few of their issues. But like I said, there are definitely some holes along this roster that they need to figure out if they're going to go anywhere in the future. So the final team, the AFC South, for me is the Indianapolis Colts. And this is a team that looked just about dead last year early in the season. Andrew Luck coming off of the shoulder injury. And they were able to somehow figure it out under first-year head coach Frank Reich. They rattled off a bunch of wins late in the season, and they were managed to find their way into the playoffs, win a playoff game over the Texans. And a lot of people are high on this Colts team, and so am I. I love the direction that Chris Ballard, the GM, has put this franchise into, building this team around Andrew Luck. For so many years early in his career, Andrew Luck really did not have anything around him. And now that he has a solid, balanced team, a young team to build around with him while he's in the prime of his career, the only thing holding this team back, from being the true Super Bowl favorite is, Andrew Luck's health. If Andrew Luck's healthy, this team is a Super Bowl contender for years to come. So when you look at what they did this offseason, they had a lot of cap space, but they decided to not really use it to save it for their own players, to use it to extend guys on their team, and only fill out a few positions here and there. Some of the big moves that they made, they brought in Justin Houston, edge player from the Kansas City Chiefs. Not quite the same player he was where he had 20 sacks in 2014, I think it was. But they bring him on a 2-year, $24 million contract. He's still a very good pass rusher. He's going to add a definite boost to the edge position for them. That's the one thing they're lacking, is a true number one guy in this pass rush. I don't know if he's that type of player anymore, but he's definitely an upgrade over what they had last season. And then they bring in Devin Funchess on a 1-year, $10 million contract at wide receiver. He's a bigger red zone target for them. He adds another element to their receiving core, where T.Y. Hilton's more of a shifty guy in this team, more of a speedy, deep threat type of player. Devin Funchess can be that possession guy for them on third downs and in the red zone. So I thought in a 1-year contract that was pretty good for them. And they didn't really lose that much. Al Woods, who's a good run defender for them. He lose for the Seahawks. Not really a huge loss there. Dontrell Inman had a role for them as a wide receiver. I don't see that being a huge loss for them whatsoever. So, this team is relatively the same as it was last year in terms of the veteran players that they're bringing back for this team. But then when you look at what they did in the draft, trading back into the second round to get a guy like Rocky Sin in the second round, a long physical cornerback out of Temple. I really like that pick for them. I had it as a top 5 cornerback. I thought he was a first-round level talent, and to get him in the second round was a good pick for them. They ended up having 3 second-round picks as a result of trading back into the second round, and because of the trade with the New York Jets last season, the Sam Darnold trade where the Colts were able to trade back from 3 to 6 to get Quentin Nelson and a couple more picks. And with those picks, they decided to get Ben Bonagut, edge player out of TCU. I thought it was a decent value in the second round. I had it more as a third-round type of talent, but we'll see if that works out for them. But one player that I did really like in the second round for the Colts was Paris Campbell, wide receiver out of Ohio State. He's not the most refined route runner in the world. His hands are pretty average at time as well, but he's got a lot of speed. And he adds another element to this offense where you can give him the ball in those short crossing routes, and he's a legitimate deep threat, I think, for this team. He adds another element to this offense. There's going to be a lot more weapons, I think, around T.Y. Hilton for Andrew Luck to throw to this season at the wide receiver position. So I love what they did there. Then look at the rest of this draft. Bobby Okereke, linebacker out of Stanford. You're hoping that he can contribute this season. I think he's more of a special teams depth player, but we will see. They got a guy like Darius Leonard in the second round last year who a lot of people thought was overdrafted, but he ended up turning out to be an absolute stud for them. So maybe they can find a similar thing with Okereke here out of Stanford. Other guys in this draft that I like, Marvell Tell, safety out of USC. I think he can contribute as a depth player early on, but maybe he can take over as a starter long-term next to Malik Hooker. A lot of interesting options here. They also addressed the offensive line in the 7th round. Jackson Barton, offensive tackle out of Utah. Javon Patterson, center off Ole Miss. continue to add guys to the pipeline on that offensive line. They did not address that position whatsoever early on in Andrew Luck's career, and I think they've learned their lesson. They're going to over-invest in that position, I think it seems like, going into the future. So when I look at this roster as a whole, like I mentioned, as long as Andrew Luck is healthy, this team is a Super Bowl contender, a legitimate Super Bowl contender, and they're going to be in the playoffs next year regardless, I think, as long as Andrew Luck is healthy. He's dealing with a calf issue right now. There's kind of some mystery over it. We'll see. It sounds like he's going to be ready for week 1, but we really never really know. But let's just point out there right now, Andrew Luck is a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. He had an MVP caliber season last year. If it wasn't for guys like Patrick Mahomes and Drew Brees doing ridiculous things statistically, we'd be talking about Andrew Luck as a guy that may be the best in the game right now. So Andrew Luck, he's one of the best in football. And if he can figure out that calf, ankle issue, whatever it is, before the season starts, he's going to be one of the elite players in the NFL next year. We're really excited to see him play. And then look at the running backs and the skill position players. They're going to run a running back by committee. It's what they did last season. It's what Frank Reich likes to do, kind of what he did with the Eagles, with what they do over there in Philadelphia. They have guys like Nyheim Hines, Marlon Mack, Jordan Wilkins. All these guys have roles. All these guys can do multiple things for this offense. Not one guy's going to have a lot of carries, a lot of touches throughout the course of the game, but they're going to do a good job of mixing and matching these guys based off of who's got the hot hand in a particular game. So it's going to be annoying for fantasy football owners, I'm sure, but they're going to be able to be effective, I think, with the running backs that they do have. And now that they've been able to address their receiving core a little bit more this offseason, you have to be excited about how many weapons they have on this team around a guy like T.Y. Hilton, who's one of the most consistent wide receivers in all of football. Maybe not an elite player at this point in his career. He's not really a top 10 wide receiver anymore, but he's still a consistent Pro Bowl level talent. And his connection with Andrew Luck, of course, is always one of the best in the NFL. So you like what they have. They have a great tight end group. When you look at guys like Eric Ebron, who's a touchdown machine last year, Jack Doyle, who was injured for the majority of last season, he's a very underrated tight end. I really like him as a player. And then you look at the wide receivers here. Devin Funchess, that possession guy. Zach Pascal and Chester Rogers were pretty solid last year as contributors. And then Paris Campbell, he has a totally different element to this offense with his speed. And then I also like a guy, Deion Kane, who they drafted last season late in the draft. If he can step up and live up to his talent level, you would just add another dimension to this offense. This offense is pretty loaded in terms of weapons around Andrew Luck, and I'm really excited for what they can do in the passing game this season. And what really helps out this team, I think, and what really helps out Andrew Luck, both in the short term and long term, is their offensive line. It was a problem for them for so many years, and I think they finally figured it out last year. Andrew Luck was the least sacked quarterback in all of football, I believe, at least the least pressured quarterback in all of football. And it all starts with their generational talents at left guard, Quentin Nelson. I think he's the best, maybe the best offensive lineman in all of football. I know it might be a little bit too early to say that going into his second year, but this guy had a huge impact on this offensive line last season. He's a generational player at the left guard position, and he's just going to be a rock for this team for so many years to come. And then you look at some of the other guys in this offensive line. Anthony Costanzo, he's still there. He's still a pretty good left tackle when he's healthy, which is kind of an issue for him. But when he's healthy, he's still pretty good. Ryan Kelly, who they drafted a few years ago at center, again, he's kind of battled some injuries and inconsistency throughout his career. But when he's healthy, he's still pretty good at center. They got a guy, Mark Lewinsky, last year from Seattle. He found a role as a pretty solid starter for them. He found his calling a card, I think, here with the Indianapolis Colts. And then they drafted Braden Smith last season, who stepped up at right tackle and was pretty good for them overall. So you like what they have at offensive line. That's a very solid unit for them. And it's one of the better offensive lines in the league when they're healthy. So moving on to the defense. This defense, it's going to be around a top 15-ish defense this season. They really aren't particularly that talented at too many spots, especially up front. They're pretty average talent-wise on the defensive line. Marcus Hunt was very good for them as a run defender last year. He's kind of an undersized defensive tackle. He's going to play that similar role for them again. You look at this defensive line here. They have guys like Danico Autry, Tyquan Lewis, Jihad Ward. Hopefully some of those guys can step up there and really beef up their run defense because that was something that was very a strong point of this defense late in the year last year when they started to rack up some wins. They were able to stop the run with some undersized defensive linemen there. So they're hoping that they can do kind of the same thing there. And then, like I said, with the edge rush, Justin Houston, he does add some juice when healthy as a pass rusher. And then you got guys like Jabal Sheard, hopefully Kamiko Toure, who I was very high on last year in the draft. Hopefully he can step up in his second season and be kind of that number 2 edge rusher for them. And like I said, Jabal Sheard, he's a very underrated player, maybe not a true number 1 guy, but I think he's solid as a number 2 pass rusher. So you like what they have up front in terms of the potential there, but as of now, I think it's just an average unit up front for the Colts. But that's fine because the back 7 of this defense is very good, and they play very fast in coverage. And that starts with Darius Leonard, who's an absolute star at inside linebacker for them, or really is a weak side outside linebacker for them in a 4-3. He had an amazing rookie year. First team All-Pro as a rookie, just insane value for them getting him in the second round last year. He's going to be very good again this year. And then you got guys like Anthony Walker, Matt Adams. Those guys they're solid role players, and they'll be fine in terms of stopping the run. But, Darius Leonard, he's a star of this defense, and he's probably their best player on this side of the ball. But what really excites me about this defense is the secondary. The quarterback group, there isn't really a standout player as of now, but it does have a lot of depth. I think Rocky Sin could actually be a superstar type of talent for this team at the cornerback spot. I love the way he plays the game. I love his length. He's got pretty good ball skills as well. I'm not willing to say that he's going to be that type of player this year, but I think down the line for this team, he could be a true number 1 shutdown corner for the Colts looking into the future here. But they also have a lot of good players on the cornerback group. Guys like Kenny Moore, Pierre Desier, who they re-signed, Quincy Wilson, who was kind of their number 2 cornerback last year. All those guys will contribute, and if they suffer a couple injuries here or there, I think they have the depth to be able to make up for one of those if they do end up getting some problems with injuries there. I love what they have at the cornerback spot. And then at safety, Malik Hooker, he's one of the most underrated safeties in all football. I know because of injuries his rookie season, a lot of people kind of forgot about him. But this is a guy going into his draft in 2016 or 2017, I believe it was. I think it was 2017. A lot of people were talking about him as kind of like an Ed Reed type of free safety where he has the sideline-to-sideline speed. He has the instincts. He has the ball skills. He didn't put up the ball production in terms of making plays as a ball hawk last year that looked good on the stat sheet, but he changes everything for this defense in the back end of this defense. I think he could have a breakout year at the safety spot. Look out for Malik Hooker to really step up and turn into one of the better safeties in all football this season. And that's what really helps this defense out because up front, they're nothing special, but if they can lock down teams in the back end of the defense in kind of that conservative Tampa 2 style of defense that they run, that's all they need really. They don't need to be a dominant force. They just need to be good enough to allow Andrew Luck and that team to go win the game for them on offense. So when I look at the Colts here overall, like I said, I think they're going to be one of the better teams in the NFL this season. If injuries do occur for this team, I think they could win as low as 9 games. That's assuming that Andrew Luck is still playing. If they have to go to Jacoby Brissett, obviously, even though Brissett's a good backup quarterback, I think this team is still, they rely on Andrew Luck to do so much for them. So he needs to stay healthy, but they could also win as many as 13 games, I think. And I think that's a little bit more likely than 9 games, if we're being completely honest here. But I have them going 11-5 this season. I think they're going to be in the playoffs once again. And I think this team is ready to go on a huge run deep into the playoffs if they can get to the playoffs healthy and if Andrew Luck can be who I think he is, which is one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the entire NFL. So that's my preview for the AFC South. Thanks, guys, for watching. My next video is going to be on the NFC South, so keep a lookout for that. I'm really excited to talk about that division. That's going to be an interesting one to watch this upcoming year. If you liked this video and you like my channel as a whole, please leave a like and subscribe below. If you want more information on the grades and how I came up with those, either let me know in the comment section. I will also have more information for that in the description. So, and of course, follow me on Twitter if you want to talk about more sports and just keep this discussion going. So thanks, guys, for watching. This is a lot of fun, and I'll look forward to releasing a new video for the NFC South shortly.